Welcome to the SB Connect webcast series, Leading Through Disruption, where students learn from business leaders how to respond when you are thrown a curve. We want to welcome our guest, Mr. Jeff Dunagan from General Atomics Aeronautical Systems. Welcome, Jeff.
Hello, everyone.
Jeff is a program planning and operations manager with the Flight Operations Avionics Division, and he brings over 25 years of experience working in human resources and operations management from various different organizations. He has led and supported teams as small as 2, but as large as 300. Jeff has been a staple in the Inland Empire for over 25 years. He has gone to high school there and is now serving in that community, and we are grateful to have him. You can follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @JeffDunagan as well. And please feel free to post any questions in the chat box so that we can try to get to them as time permits. So Jeff, in light of the current crisis that the world is facing, what has been your biggest challenge so far? And how have you and your colleagues positioned yourselves to best meet that challenge?
The biggest challenge that my colleagues and I have faced right now is having the correct information, and adapting to that is making sure we get that information out to everybody at a regular basis. In the beginning of this crisis and then communicating that correct information out to everybody, you had to be able to stay on top of it and know what's happening. And the reason for that is that when the employees would ask us questions about what was going on, you needed to be knowledgeable about what was happening, and then you needed to be able to be honest with them. That honesty builds trust in leadership. And so it was very, very challenging to be able to stay on top of that information and make sure you had the correct information, and not just what was being put out by the media and everything like that, but as well as what was being put out internally within our organization and how we were supposed to respond to certain things. So I would say that was probably the biggest challenge that we were faced with. Go.
So Jeff, what leadership skills have you found to be most important as you lead your team through the challenge that your organization is currently facing?
There's 4 of them: communication, empathy, listening, and problem solving. Communication, number 1, in the sense that, like I just said a moment ago, keeping everybody informed, being truthful and honest about that communication. Sometimes it was a message that you didn't want to have to send, like telling everybody, hey, we have to wear masks now. Hey, we have to social distance, things that we weren't used to. None of us were used to in our daily lives. Some people had to start working from home. And so, communicating out the reasons as to why. And then on top of that, taking the feedback that we received from that communication and then acting upon that feedback, not just letting it fall on deaf ears. Empathy, in the sense that these are stressful times. Everybody's scared. No one knew, especially in the beginning, no one knew what was happening. No one knew what was going on. We get all kinds of different reports, conflicting reports. And so we had to be empathetic to our employees and listen to them. And then if they had suggestions or if they had concerns, they had questions, try to address them and help them as much as we possibly could. That also leads, it's a good segue into listening. When they would bring something up, don't just, listen to what they have to say and then just let it fall on deaf ears. Actually taking that feedback and acting upon that feedback in trying to implement some of their suggestions as best as you could. There were certain things that we couldn't do, but for the most part, there were things that we could do in trying to listen to them and let them know that we are in fact listening to what they're saying. And then problem solving, last but not least. These are some challenging times, very crazy situations that we're dealing with. And being able to problem solve and think through situations creatively. For example, there's parts of the job, within our organization, to our employees can't social distance. It's a requirement that they have to be working close together. So we had to figure out ways to make sure that they were able to do that and get their job done, but be safe at the same time. So the problem solving is thinking outside of the box and thinking about ways to help them, solve those problems that we ordinarily wouldn't have thought of.
Excellent. Jeff, I know you shared an example as well about how, in your organization, sometimes that social distancing does not work, just given the nature of the job. Can
Mhm.
you share maybe just one quick example of how problem solving has really become an important leadership skill as you've kind of seen it during these challenging times?
Absolutely. So, like for example, the social distancing piece. Our mechs and our techs, they have to work close together. When you're working on an aircraft, quite often there's certain things that require two people to do in order for it to be. It's what's called safety of flight. And so we had to problem solve. Okay, well, how do we figure out a way that we can follow the guidance of our customer, where we're actually having two individuals work on this particular project like they're supposed to, but at the same time keep them safe. And so, one of the first things that came to mind, of course, was masks. The other thing was getting cleaning supplies, making sure that things were cleaned on a regular basis, stepping up the cleaning. At a time when cleaning supplies were in short supply, we ended up having to use isopropyl alcohol because we had it available to us from another resource. So it was ways of figuring things out that ordinarily we wouldn't have done, but we kind of had to. Okay, well, let's figure this out here, and let's find a way to make this happen. And so those would be some examples there.
Sure, sure. Thank you. And so, Jeff, I think we've talked about some of the leadership skills that you have found to be most important as you lead teams. Now, what about some of the new skills that are being required of your team members, in response to how this disruption is kind of changing what we're doing?
That's a challenge. The biggest one would be flexibility. Um, as we talked about a moment ago, old habits die hard. When you have a job that you're supposed to be doing and you have a specific process that you're supposed to follow, and as I was saying in aerospace, there's very specific processes that we have to follow. Technical orders is what we call them, and learning how to be flexible, but yet still stay within the confines of that requirement. Um, it's we have to consistently talk to the employees. Okay, we got to social distance, we got to wear our masks, things like that. We still have to do that because they have to work together. It's delivering that message consistently, but then as far as they're concerned, seeing us as leadership modeling those behaviors helps them learn those behaviors as well. So it's not necessarily just the team members having to learn new skills, but us as management having to learn new skills and then modeling those new skills to the team members. And again, when we go out on the floor, it's making sure we have, or going to the hangars, make sure we have our masks on. When we're walking together and doing a walk, make sure we're 6 feet apart. Those little things there do make a difference, and people pay attention. And if we model those behaviors, our team members are going to model those behaviors, and they'll learn those new skills. The other piece would be, as I was saying a moment ago, with regards to limited resources with the cleaning, learning how to do your job with limited resources, things that we wouldn't have ordinarily have had before because of different shortages. And again, I'll use the example of the cleaning supplies. We stepped up the cleaning requirements for safety, but there were times when we didn't have all the cleaning requirements that we need, or cleaning supplies that we needed. And so had to make sure that we could do more with less, if you will. It's figuring out ways to get those things done in ways that we wouldn't have ordinarily thought of before. And so our team members had to learn how to think outside the box as well. And it was one of those things where leadership was putting that example forward, and then team members had to then adapt, and we had to continue giving that message out to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. And I like those examples that you kind of shared as well, and giving some context of how your team has really thought outside the box and made the most out of the resources that they have. I think the idea of being flexible within the constraints of your organization, I think is unique to every organization. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
And so, Jeff, as you think about, looking back at this, right, in some way, and what lessons do you think, students would be able to take, right, from this experience to better prepare them for the future, as they inevitably will experience disruptions, maybe not of this exact nature, but as they kind of go forward, right? So thinking about lessons to encourage students to better prepare for the future.
So, as you just said, things are always changing. The only constant in life is change. The biggest lesson that I would say that a student should take from this entire situation that we're dealing with is how to be flexible when you're faced with when you're faced with a problem. Okay, don't get so mired down into the negative aspects of it. Find outlets to where you can be creative and solve problems. The other piece to it too is that there was a good portion of the time when this seemed like it was going to be an insurmountable obstacle for all of us here in the United States, or the world for that matter. However, one would argue that we as a community have done a great job in coming together. And you go out into the stores and you see people wearing masks. You go out into the stores and you see people social distancing properly. And so my point on that is that we don't just give up. We keep going, we keep persevering, we follow the guidance that our leaders are giving us, and we follow the guidance that we've been told to do, because only as a team will we make it through this. And so, but at the same time, we also got to keep persevering. We got to keep going. We can't just give up and say, okay, well, we're just going to let this all we're going to let this take us all over. Don't give up on it. And then on top of that, listen to what other people have to say. It's very easy when you're in a leadership role to think you have all the answers, to think you've got all the answers and you know what you're doing, and nobody else is as smart as you. That's a very easy trap to fall into. And what I have found through my own personal leadership style is that quite often I learn more when I listen to what people are telling me, and when I appreciate the different perspectives that people have. Where they say diversity, is a spice of life, if you will. I don't know if that's the proper term or not, but appreciating diversity and understanding that the way that I would solve a problem is completely different than the way one of my coworkers would solve a problem. But perhaps between the two of us working as a team, we can come up with a solution that benefits everybody. So embracing those changes and embracing the diversification of our community, and working together. That's the most important thing that I would say, that, to prepare a student for the future, is understanding that cultural diversity and working as a team is so crucial to our own success. And if we embrace it, we can be that much better off.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff, for those words of wisdom from your experiences. We've got a couple of questions that I want to post. We have a few minutes.
Sure.
And so the first question is, if we were to go back to our normal before March, have you found that any practices you've had to adapt would become standard practice? In other words, have you come up with any new strategies that you think are best practices to continue regardless of the current disruption?
I would say cleaning. It's when every year we go into the flu season, and everybody inevitably ends up getting the flu, or it goes around an office, is spread like wildfire, that type of thing. What I think is been a really huge benefit that we've learned from this whole experience is that keeping our workspaces clean and staying on top of them is a behavior that we should continue on. And I think that we've, as a company, have learned that as well, is that not that we were dirty beforehand, but taking the extra steps to make sure that we're wiping things down. It's much like when you're at the gym, when you're working out at the gym, take the extra step to wipe down the piece of equipment beforehand, and then take the step to wipe down the piece of equipment afterwards. And it's really more for not necessarily to wipe down afterwards, not the benefit for you, it's the benefit of the person's coming after you. Same thing holds true at work. And so I think those would be something that, if we were to go back to, business pre-March, if you will, that would be something that I think we should take away with.
Excellent. We have one more question, and it asks, have you identified or experienced a silver lining to this disruption?
Yes. The silver lining for me is my job required me to work with students at high schools. That's a good portion of the programs that I was working on. I would go to high schools. I would interact with people on a face-to-face basis. What happened when all of this occurred is that all of a sudden the programs that I was working on went away because the schools shut down. And the reason why I was working with the schools is trying to kind of get students interested in career options with a company like ours, or even within aerospace or mechatronics, or our apprenticeship program that we have, that type of thing. But what I have discovered is that technology is a wonderful thing. And it can fill in areas where we didn't necessarily utilize the best way that we could. And so I think the technology aspect of everything is to me is a silver lining, is that it's taught me to rely on certain things that, or it's taught me that there are certain things out there, like for example, a Zoom or Cisco WebEx, that those are calls that, things that we can utilize, and we can record these types of sessions, and we could duplicate this type of a session, and we can show it to people who aren't able to attend right now, later on down the road. So that's the silver lining to me. If nothing else, it's taught us that technology can be a wonderful thing, and it can keep us connected. Up to that point, I would say that I was always the type of guy that when you sit down at the dinner table, you put your phone away. Technology does not interrupt dinner time. I still believe that. I still think that's important. You go to restaurants, and I would get so annoyed where I'd see people with their phones out or whatever. And so I've learned to embrace it a little bit more, that there are some positive things about it, that it's kept people that are in isolation, it's kept them together, it's kept people sane, it's allowed people to interact with other people. On top of that, you have things like virtual tours of the Smithsonian, you have virtual tours of the Louvre Museum. I mean, there's so many wonderful things that have come out of this, and so that's the silver lining that I would see.
That's excellent. Yeah, well, Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest this afternoon, and for sharing your leadership insights with our audience. We truly value and appreciate you being here with us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay tuned for episode 3, which should be coming shortly. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Jeff.
Bye-bye.